This can be a way to actually enhance and facilitate our sensibility for welfare problems and social values. And the third one is how to benefit from narratives and studies and stories. The basic idea, to put the point very on the nail, is that to learn what value is, it's not enough just to learn it by studying rules or economic strategies. You also have to see how values are being portrayed in a story, in a drama, in a film. That's how young people, also older people, learn what values means. A Shakespeare drama is as important to study as it is to study just a traditional economic strategy or legal rule. And that is why we in the teaching combines the rules studies from economy and law with films, stories, etc. We combine it. And what is the essence of this pedagogy? The law and economic strategy being often linear. And this kind of learning usually directs us to one conclusion at a problem, at the exclusion of others. They close options rather than open them. And this is no way really to learn. Not even in modern business school. It is untrue, it is tedious. It excludes us from ourselves in participating in learning. So other forms of expressions have much more to say, and say it differently. A picture, for example, has a density of it in its depiction of relationship of ideas and forces, which can be both easy to take in and complex to decipher. Its ability to communicate a drama, a film, or images to communicate paradoxical ambiguity, double-edged thought, repays continuing reflection. In other words, this approach takes seriously the fact that we human beings are embodied beings. We're always within a situation where other emotions and images are at stake. So the physicality and the drama of sounds, poetry, images draws out memories and associations which offer each observer inimitable divergent path to interpretation. So this is why putting in liberal arts the tradition of both the classics, the antiques, and modern popular culture is basically a value study. It basically has to do with learning students to strengthen our sense of values, to say that values is much more than a set of rules. That value is tied to our reflective capacity. That is our ability to reformulate a problem, to see the same problem from different angles, which is also a very pedagogic, valuable tool to be able to actually be able to work with other people who have different perspectives and people from other kinds of discipline or local actors. So there is a very important element in this pedagogy of learning, also in our capacity of working with others. I will just say that I'm in this teaching program of cultural economy. I have different kinds of perspectives that goes into this: design, the problem of brand, the problem of photo, and the problem of sustainable entrepreneurship and performing city space. And that's what I'll speak to you about in the next, after the break. Show you two examples of combining that a local company combines ideas from people, art people, design people, and the business world, to show you how it actually is also done in reality. And one example I was involved with myself, it's a Danish architect company, Carnera and Overgaard, who together with local people created an attempt to build a place of sustainable architecture. This is a city in Denmark called Assens, and this area is connecting a pedestrian area with shops and the town hall. And before, it was a desolated area where there were crimes and people sort of just it was a sort of an empty area where nothing happened. What they tried to build was to build a kind of a path where people could use the place in a different way to facilitate social encounters. So the basic idea of the sustainable architecture was not so much about reducing the global warming as such, but it has more to do with how do you create something, how do you create buildings, which also facilitate social encounters, which facilitates another city life. And this is a project called Design to Improve Life, was facilitated 4 years ago in Copenhagen, was a major success, which facilitated, brought together designers and other people and different kinds of engineers and local problems, not only local problems in Denmark, but also around the world, to rethink the concept of design. And the basic idea was that design is not only about shaping a chair. You know, the Danish chair industry is very famous for building furnitures. You know, tables, chairs, etc. There's a big tradition in Denmark for that. What this program was about was not about reducing design just up to focus on the shape on a chair. This has a huge tradition within design. This problem was based on the idea that design can be a facilitator to actually solve social problems. And here are two examples. One here, and it won the first prize, was what do you call it? Hvad kalder man kanyle på engelsk? A tube. Tube. This place here in Africa and also in Vietnam had problems with getting the idea of combining aesthetic design with a social problem. And here the problem was, how do you actually get poor people who have very long to pure drinking water to actually create something where they can get pure drinking water. And then they invented this tube, which has a filter, a very fine, refined filter, so people could actually use this in a very elegant way. And this other one is the idea of a seal for a ship with sun cells in it. These are sun cells that reflects and that are receptible for the sun energy, that can actually increases the capacity of the boat. And it was very important for people who have long transportation but have no financial...
How to fuel the boat.
When I was invited here, I thought about what would be the best sort of appetizer for this field, and I chose space for different set of reasons. Partly because I think the imaginary power of space actually invites you into something that you can recognize yourself to a certain extent, and also I think to a very long extent. And also to show you how important how we perform space and how we manage space has a lot to do with how we can change our communities and our environment. It's not just space as space. It's really something that does something to us all, and we can do something with. So space is a very good example of building a bridge between economic and social values. And I will, in this introduction, in the first part, I will say a few words about the spatial turn. There's a spelling mistake, I can see. Spatial turn. And the city as a strategy. What does it mean to actually incorporate the idea of city as a strategy? And then I'll give you some case examples, particularly one big case from New York I've seen myself, and another case. And hopefully it can be inspiring for your own ideas. And the basic idea of introducing and putting so much emphasis on the spatial turn and what we mean by managing space is because it says something about the problem between the public life and the private life, and what is the relation between the two. And it says something about how we can actually create values in terms of managing atmosphere and affect. And I will speak about what do we understand by an atmosphere. What is atmospheric problems? And then we'll see if there's energy and time for speaking about. And within the field of the spatial turn, there are three issues that is being focused on. One is the problem of knowledge, and one is the the reality of space, and the third is the political economic relation. And what I'll show you today is that the new knowledge about space has to do with actually taking into concern our five senses. And how important taking into the five senses of human being is actually something that we can manage. We can do something with our five senses, and that has an importance to how we can actually create a different space. And I'll give you different kinds of examples with that, both in terms of in schools, kids in their classrooms, the sense of street, how to feel at home in a social community, how to feel at home in a work environment, in a local place of living. All these things has to do with how we actually feel these things and how we sense them. And what I'll show now is that the political economic element, the problem of managing space, how we manage these things, is actually something that is important to create economic and social values. Because when we speak about space in relation to economy, we speak usually about space as a developing strategy, mobilizing local resources, changing, building, as we see down here, how to brand the city, how to create the city development. But today, this is a much more complex problem because it involves a relation constantly. It involves a relation between innovative city and creative developments. In other words, what I spoke about before, we cannot have a political, economic developing of city space without working with different people, without creating immaterial labor, without creating exchange, without facilitating the liberal arts tradition. I'll just give you a very simple little story about why the use of space is a question, is a crucial social question today. Let me just give you one little example. When I went with the train from Copenhagen to the airport, I was sitting next to a girl. She was sitting in front of me. Our knees were almost touching each other. Let's just poeticize the story a bit. That I was flirting with her a bit. Let's imagine that I was trying to get her attention in this place in the train. But what really happened in that scene was that there are three different spaces at stake at one time. One space, me sitting next to her and my knees almost touching her. Space 2, the landscape passing outside that we are going through. Space 3, that she was actually chatting with her uncle in the States, and I was downloading a movie from Croatia. And the point, of course, here is that what happens more and more and more is that space is not just something that is there. It is something that we use and that we are exchanging in. We're going in and out different spaces, and that there are multiple spaces at stake at the same time. And this example shows that space is not only about, as it was in the Renaissance, something about a fixed position. Traditionally, we would have we would speak about a space from a fixed position, as I could walk in here and speak about this as a fixed room. Today, space is in a social encounter.
So you can create space where there appears to be none.
There is. We can say that there is a space when you can't imagine that there is not.
It was just to invite in the beginning to try to show what is actually happening now in how we are encountering managing space today. Because what happens is that there are two schools. There are the two. Do they need a break? Managing space can be a way to produce social values, and I will first make a very little introduction to performing space, what we mean by that concept, and then introduce you to the German philosopher Gernot Böhmer's concept of atmosphere. There are two schools where we, in the sort of space literature, one is focusing on the idea of which the state planning and state regulation is the main activity and the main way of building up social values in terms of space. In other words, state governance, state planning, and particularly it has its heydays in the 60s and 70s. For those of you who have studied architecture, you would know that the relation between welfare values and the functional planning and functional architecture was a very big thing in the 60s and the 70s. And what happens today is that this kind of functional state regulation of space managing is not enough. It's not enough to actually facilitate social values and welfare activities only by this kind of state regulation. And the basic idea of performing space and managing space is that space is not only something that is planned down to the point, it's also something, there are also elements of provisionary or non-planned element where you have to mobilize local actors. And this kind of self-organizing process, together with welfare values,